fact, I'll go ahead and start recording so I don't forget. All right. So we're up to about 16 people. And now I can't see my clock. Karen, can you let me know when it's like 2 after 7?
It's 6:57 now.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so Brandon shared that he was born on Shawnee lands. That's pretty cool. All right, we're up to 20. Is anybody else enjoying a beverage? I'm having seltzer water. Okay, good. Good to stay hydrated. Glad everybody's doing that. Got some wine, we got some kombucha. Different drinks for different folks. Vodka lemon, that sounds very tasty. All right, we're up to 22 folks. Tom, is the sun getting better or worse?
Uh-oh.
I don't know. I can't see my video.
Uh-oh.
So I don't know. Let's see. How do I get it to switch over to me? You tell me. Is my video looking bad?
Well, so I'm in charge of the video, but yeah, you're a little white from about here down.
Very bright.
Yeah.
Very bright.
Okay. Well, it's about to go behind a tree.
All right, we'll manage till then. As long as you're not, you don't feel like you're in the interrogation chair. So welcome to those of you who are joining us and getting settled here. We're coming up on 7, so we'll be starting in a few minutes. So right now what you see is a Zoom screen tutorial, so you can kind of get a lay of the land. So it's up to you if you want to be visible. You can hide if you'd like. We are asking folks to stay muted unless you're asking a question or sharing something. And we will have time to share a little later in the presentation, because we know that a lot of folks are joining us who remember the 1970s in Issaquah and have some things that they can share with us. So let's see, what else do I need to talk about? We've talked about the chat function is also something to be aware of. So that's a great place to ask questions. If you don't want to use chat and you want to wave your hand instead, you can wave your hand instead. Let's see.
Not on the Zoom.
Okay. So we're still getting people trickling in here. All right. So we're up to 31. I'm going to check my email real quick and make sure we don't have anybody who's struggling. I mean, struggling to get in, not, struggling in general. Okay. Well, looks like we're good to go. So, oops, here we go, one more. All right. So, Karen, what time do you have? And I'll formally introduce you in a minute.
I have 7:02.
Okay, 7:02. That's a good time to start. All right, so welcome to our second virtual history happy hour. Again, if you're not talking, we'd love it if you'd stay muted so we can cut down on the background noise. Again, feel free to use the chat to ask questions. Feel free to wave to ask questions. We're going to be pausing between the sections to do questions on each of the sections. And then we'll have time at the end for folks to ask questions and to share their own experiences of the 1970s. Okay, we got a couple more people joining, so I'll give them a minute. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we at the Issaquah History Museums pause to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded ancestral lands of the Duwamish and Snoqualmie peoples, past and present. We recognize their sacrifice and value the opportunity to live, work, and gather on their traditional homeland. And again, there's a link in the chat if you want to go see, if you are not in Issaquah right now and you'd like to see whose ancestral homelands you are on, you can go check out that map. We like sharing that because we feel like it's important to talk about whose land we're currently living on and using. So this is the second virtual history happy hour we've held. We've decided that it's a lot of fun and pretty successful, so we're going to do a few more, and I'll give you the dates for those before we finish up here. So the Issaquah History Museums, under normal circumstances, we operate two museums, the Gilman Town Hall and the Issaquah Depot Museum. We also operate the Issaquah Valley Trolley out of the depot during summers. And we offer a variety of in-person programming. So obviously right now, none of that is feasible. So we're looking for new ways to share history with our community and our constituents. So virtual happy hours is one of those ways. We're also doing a ton of social media. So if you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, you'll get lots of nice bite-sized pieces of Issaquah's history to follow along with. And you'll also get an email tomorrow following up on this and sharing some other resources. So if you hear something tonight that you think, gosh, I'd really like to dig in and learn a little bit more about that, we'll give you the resources to do that tomorrow. So I'm going to welcome our cast of characters here who's helping out tonight. So Karen Gaff, if you want to give a wave. Karen is our programs and something else coordinator. We're still working on her her title. So, but Karen is going to be helping out and doing sort of moderating stuff for us tonight and helping get your questions answered. So we're also here with Brandon Claycomb. Brandon, you want to give a wave? And Tom Anderson. Tom, you want to give a wave? Yay. So Tom and Brandon are both former board members and longtime volunteers, and they've cut their teeth on Issaquah history in our series of pub crawls that we do in collaboration with the Downtown Issaquah Association. So thanks so much to these guys, because they're both volunteers and they're here just because they love history and they love the organization. So I'm really excited to have them along board with me. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the stage for the 1970s in Issaquah and talk about some of the factors that were shaping the community at that time. So setting the stage. So you have to go back to 1940 in October to get one of the events that really changed the way Issaquah was. So in 1940, the Lake Washington floating bridge opened. And what that meant is that now people could get from Seattle to Issaquah in a much shorter time period. This was the first bridge that was built over the lake. And it opened up a lot of possibilities in Issaquah for people to live there and work in Seattle. So, and this was especially important after World War II ended. After World War II, more and more people start moving out into the suburbs. More and more people are purchasing cars. Americans start looking for the American dream. They want to have the nice house with the white picket fence and the golden retriever on the lawn, and a car in the driveway. And so as the decades passed, that's kind of what started happening in Issaquah. We had more people moving into the area. So here's a great population map of Issaquah that helps to demonstrate one of the other factors of the 1970s, which was rapid growth. So between 1970 and about 1960 to 1970, the population of Issaquah more than doubled. So there'd been a huge amount of change in the community by the time we got into the 1970s. So farming had been a big industry in Issaquah, and there were a number of family farms in the area. This picture is of the Pickering farm. The Pickering barn is one of the few barns still in existence from Issaquah's dairy farming days. And so we learned in 2006, we did an oral history project, and we interviewed Rob Pickering, who was farming after World War II in Issaquah. And he recollected that a lot of the different USDA requirements that were coming through made it much, much harder for small family farms like his to be able to make a living at farming. So, you know, the inspector would come in and say, okay, well, you need to enclose all your pipes, or you need to not have the calf in the same pen with its mother. You have to build another calf for the pen, or pen for the calf. So all of these things started making it more and more difficult for small family farmers in Issaquah. And because more people were moving to the area and development was happening, all of this property became much more valuable. And so what we see happening is a lot of the farmers in the 50s and 60s selling their property so that it can be developed, because there was no money left in family farming. In the early 1970s, I-90 came through. It expanded what had been previously known as Highway 10. So Interstate 90 was much wider than Highway 10, though. So when I-90 came through, they had to take down the iconic Issaquah trestle that folks had grown up seeing, and maybe, if they were naughty, walking across and playing on. So, the trestle is something that you see in a lot of different old photographs of Issaquah, and that was something that that disappeared in the early 1970s. Had a bit of a change of government in the 1970s. Bill Flintoft, who had been the longest running mayor in Issaquah up until then, finished his last term, and Keith Hansen came in as mayor. And Keith was really instrumental in managing a lot of the growth of the city, because of course it was going from being a small town to a slightly larger town. Looking back from where we are now, Issaquah has a population of about 35,000 people. So it's hard to appreciate how the change from 1,000 to 4,000 would have been pretty extreme for the folks that were living here. And then this is a picture of downtown Issaquah. This is Front Street, looking south. So you can see the True Value hardware store. That's Lewis Hardware Store, was still hanging in there. And you can see just beyond that the H&H Tavern, which is still around. The H&H is Issaquah's second longest operating tavern, the first being the Rollin' Log. So this is a picture of the mayor, A.J. Culver, and a number of other dignitaries. All the way over at the left-hand side is a man in a clerical collar. That man is Bob Gray. Bob Gray founded, or actually he didn't found it, but he transformed the Pine Lake Presbyterian Church. He was a pastor that came to Issaquah in the, I believe, the mid to late 60s. And the Pine Lake Presbyterian Church was really a phenomenal organization in the community in the 1970s. They determined that instead of having a church building and then worrying about paying for upkeep and paying for utilities and cleaning it and managing it and worrying about it and putting a new roof on it now and again. So instead of worrying about a physical church, they decided that they were just going to meet in the cafeteria of a local school, and that they were going to focus on the community and what the community needed. So in his time as the pastor of the church, the Pine Lake Presbyterian Church created the organization Issaquah Community Services, and they created the organization that became the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank. So Bob Gray passed away just a couple months ago, and he was recognized in a lot of different areas by the food bank for his contributions to the start of that organization. So there were other organizations kind of getting started, getting up and running in Issaquah as the population grew and more development happened. Issaquah had a huge Labor Day celebration during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Unfortunately, it started becoming a little too much for Issaquah's very small police force. One of the police members on the force at the time told us in an oral history that really the Labor Day celebrations kind of were turning into just a big 3-day drunk. Thousands of people would come into town, lots of alcohol would be consumed, and things would just get a little bit out of hand. So in 1970 was the first year that instead of the Labor Day celebration, we had the Salmon Day celebration. So Salmon Days was a daytime only, alcohol-free, family-focused event. And you can see here, this is one of the early booths at Salmon Days, back when things were a little bit more homegrown and not quite as polished as they are in Salmon Days of today. So this is the Doc Gibson house. Doc Gibson was an early mayor in Issaquah. He was also one of the only medical professionals Issaquah had from the 1880s up until the early 1900s. And he didn't pass away until 1945. In the early 1970s, his home was demolished. And this was one of those kind of clarion calls to the community that, that the development that was happening was starting to take away some really valued and familiar buildings. And so this was one of the catalysts for the formation of the Issaquah Historical Society, which later became the Issaquah History Museums, which formed in 1972. And at the time that it formed, part of their mission statement was, quote, to save what is left of our town and way of life. So you can kind of see from that, that statement that they were really feeling like the Issaquah that they knew was disappearing. So another thing that happened in the 1970s was 1979. The now world famous Village Theater started here in Issaquah. So the fellow who rallied the troops and got a community theater group started in Issaquah was named Carl Darchuk. He's pictured with his head sticking out the open window upstairs at the original theater building, which is now the Village Theater's first stage building. And of course, Village Theater is well known throughout the theater world, and they're actually the second largest theater in Washington State, right after the Fifth Avenue Theater. So it's pretty exciting that they started from such humble beginnings and have grown to be such a great community asset. So, and speaking of community assets, the other thing that happened during the 1970s was that people started getting more conservation minded, and that happened in Issaquah too. So I'm going to turn it over now to Tom Anderson, and he's going to talk about yet another organization that was founded in Issaquah during the 1970s that's still around today, and that is the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. So I'm going to mute myself. Actually, first, let's check and see if we have any quick questions from the early 1970s. Do you have anything, Karen?
No, we don't have anything at this point. Nobody
Okey-doke.
has anything yet.
All right, well, I'm going to mute myself then, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Well, great, thank you. Let's see, is my video coming through okay? I can't see my video.
Much better, yes.
Okay, very good. All right, well, let's get right into it. Next slide, please. Okay, that grizzled guy standing there amongst the disciples is Harvey Manning. He was a local hero and a hiking book author. Many of you are familiar with him, I'm sure, and probably some of you even have some of his books on your shelves. He cranked out well, more than a dozen hiking books, things like 100 Hikes in the North Cascades, 55 hikes around Snoqualmie Pass, 100 hikes in Alpine Lakes, and then eventually the Footsore series, which focused on things close into town and all that. It talks about the Issaquah Alps area and all that. Well, so Harvey was a strategic thinker and a wordsmith, and he knew that to fight some battles on the conservation scene, he needed a battle cry. So next slide, please. Okay, well, sometimes these little hills around Issaquah were referred to as the Issaquah blobs. And well, that's not the sort of name you can use to really rally the troops. So he was looking for something better than that. And he had been reading Whymper's book, Rambles in the Alps. In this case, the Alps were the real Alps. And well, that churned around in his brain, and eventually he struck on this catchy little phrase, the Issaquah Alps. And so he decided that's a good name to give this thing that we want to fight some conservation battles on. Let's try that. Okay, next slide, please. Well, so he banged out on his typewriter a missive of his vision for some of the conservation initiatives in the area, and sent it around, including to the Seattle Times, and edited down version of that ended up getting run in the Seattle Times, and it was entitled Issaquah Alps, Preserve a Greenbelt Near Seattle. So that was kind of the beginning. That's what got the ball rolling, and the phone started ringing, and he admitted, yes, I am the creator of this Issaquah Alps thing. He modestly said. Okay, next slide. All right, so now we have a name. That's great, but now we need an army to help mobilize this battle we want to wage, and because what we need is boots on the ground. And why do we need boots on the ground? Well, in order to protect these areas, we need votes. Boots on the trail equals votes on the trail. Oop, let's go back. Okay, there we go, good. Boots on the trail equals votes for the trail. So that was part of the strategy. And so, all right, we need to raise an army to get some boots on the trail. How should we do that? Okay, next slide, please. Well, Harvey talked amongst his hiking buddies in the area and pitched the idea of, well, hey, how about we form a club? And the club can be my secret army. So he pitched that. That went over well. Issaquah Press ran a little announcement about that first meeting that was to take place. And then that meeting happened. So next slide, please. That meeting occurred in what's the Sportsman's Club, just on the east side of Issaquah. Most people refer to it as the gun club or the firing range or whatever. It's the clubhouse associated with the firing range, and that still's out there. This is an historic building in its own right. And there it is in all its glory, and that first meeting was there. The reason why it happened there is that Tom Meckler, on the right there, who was a member of that club, also a charter member of the Issaquah Alps Trails Club, well, he said, hey, I know a place where we can have a meeting, and so it ended up meeting there. So David Kapler on the left and Tom Meckler on the right are two charter members of the club. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to pause for a second. I just got a note from somebody that their slides are not showing up for them. How many folks are not able to see the slides? Okay, it looks like they're good for everybody else. I'm wondering if there's a bandwidth issue with somebody's computer, but it looks like most people can see them. So we are making a recording, so you'll be able to see the slides in the full recording. And I'm sorry for whatever issues are happening, but I'm not sure how to solve.
Okay, well, yes, sorry about that. Maybe we need to study reducing the how many bits each slide is. I don't know.
No, maybe he needs to hit stop the stop video thing on the bottom of the screen. I don't know.
It's an idea. Okay, shall we proceed? All right. So I asked Tom and Dave to come inside and sit down at the table. And I like to pretend that this is the same table they were sitting at 41 years ago. Well, I live in a fantasy world. That's all I can say about that. Okay, so the club met and decided to call themselves the Issaquah Alps Trails Club after Harvey's new moniker for the little mountains around Issaquah, and the ball was rolling. Next slide, please. Okay, well, now we got this army. Let's put them to use. So the club started holding some hikes called public official awareness hikes to focus attention on certain initiatives and areas that needed some attention and protection in and around Issaquah. And on the left there is an announcement in the Issaquah Press about such a hike. And then on the right is a little write-up about it in the club newsletter, which was just a hand-typed little blurb that was sent out monthly or quarterly. Okay, next slide, please. Here are people gathering for one of those, I think not the first, but the second public official awareness hike on April 26, 1980. You can see the profile of Squawk Mountain there in the background, and this is right behind what at that time was a Thriftway, then became Front Street Market, and now it is the Dollar Tree. What else you can see on the buildings in the middle background there is the roof of the Julius Bone Pool.
Yeah.
And then lower there's the strip mall that's just to the south of the Dollar Tree building. Okay, next slide, please. Well, soon enough, the machinery got rolling and regular hikes were done. Pretty much every weekend there'd be a hike, and Issaquah Press was helpful in publicizing these hikes. Some of them were co-sponsored with the Issaquah Parks Department, and some not, but that was one pattern that also was done. Okay, next slide. All right, now we have all this machinery in place and the army in place. Well, let's use all that to accomplish some particular goal. And so we're going to focus here on one particular initiative, and there were many, and we don't have time to go over them all. So I'm just picking kind of one of the big wins from that era, and that was the Cougar Mountain Park. Harvey Manning lived on Cougar Mountain. He lived about 600-foot elevation. He liked to call his little place the 200-meter hut. In the parlance of the European mountaineers. So that amused him, so that's what he called his place. Well, so to draw attention to the tremendous resources of Cougar Mountain, and Cougar Mountain was in a development phase in those days. Things were happening, and Harvey knew that, okay, something needs to be done, or before you know it, there won't be any land left to conserve on Cougar Mountain. So that was a hot topic for him and a hot topic for the club. And to draw attention to it, an event was conceived and executed called Return to Newcastle. Okay, next slide, please. And so here's the first of that such event series. I kept the wording here. That first one was actually called Return to Old Newcastle. The old was dropped in subsequent events, but 1983 was that first event. And here's King County Executive Randy Revelle addressing the crowd. You can see an old army tent in the background where some photographs and historical artifacts from the mining history of the area, which is part of what we wanted to have preserved and all. Okay, next slide, please. And well, it had kind of an old-timey theme, so why not bring some old-timey things like a covered wagon? You know, never mind. Well, okay, covered wagons weren't in use in the mining days there, but anyway, on the sign on it is what I really wanted to focus on. That it really tells the story. This whole thing, this Return to Newcastle event, was all about promoting the notion of this Cougar Mountain Wildland Park. Next slide, please. So the ball was rolling by that time in 1983. Harvey had been doing his work, and the army of the club had been doing their work, and so Randy Revelle had been brought around to this idea, and here he is signing an ordinance making it the official policy of the county to attempt to make this happen. You know, this isn't making it happen, but this is stating an intent to, all right, let's have a dialogue with the developers. Let's see if we can acquire some of this land. They need to be reimbursed for it, of course. Tax dollars will have to be spent to make this happen, but it can happen. And the ball was rolling. That was a major milestone in this, this effort. Next slide, please. Another, just to catch the flavor of these events, well, it was like a little circus. There's the display in the background there with artifacts and photographs, and here's a little mini stagecoach you could take a ride in, something for everyone. It was quite a show. Next slide, please. Okay, roll forward 2 years. 2 years after that, a lot of progress had been made, and a deal had been struck with the main developer of Cougar Mountain, a major development on Cougar Mountain, the Dayon Corporation. And a deed signing party was held up on top of Cougar Mountain, and here they are making speeches. That's Harvey at the podium, and Randy Revelle, King County Executive, getting ready to make his speech. Next slide, please. Okay, let's celebrate with a glass of champagne. So we have Harvey and Randy Revelle, and the Dayon general manager. There's a third in line there. Dayon was the developer of that major development. And then Bruce Lang, who I think at that time was King County Commissioner, one of the commissioners on the county there that needed to, needed his vote behind all this. So he was a supporter of it. Next slide, please. Well, Harvey played such a key role in this whole thing that King County declared that day to be Harvey Manning Day. So there he is enjoying that bit of honor. Next slide, please. So the Cougar Mountain Wildland Park happened, and it's an amazing thing that happened. Over the years, there have been many minor additions to it, growing eventually to over 3,000 acres, 35 miles of trails, many of those miles built by the Issaquah Alps Trails Club and then taken over by the county. Four trailheads with parking. It's within the walking distance of thousands of county residents. This is what Harvey liked to call a wilderness within. I mean, it's not the same as the North Cascades wilderness, a wilderness where man is just a visitor. This is the wilderness within the domain of man, within our neighborhoods and all that, close at hand. But it has some attributes of the wildness that those other places have, and it's of value to us who enjoy living here. So there was a resounding success story of an early initiative for the club. Okay, next slide, please. Well, Harvey passed away in 2006, and we honored him with a statue in one of the little parks in Issaquah on Southeast Bush Street. You can go visit him there anytime you like. We came up with a little moniker to honor him as champion of the Issaquah Alps. So the name he came up with lives on and is cast there in bronze to help honor that effort. If you haven't visited the statue, please do. It's a very well done presentation. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we just talked about one particular story. There have been many stories, and we don't have time to talk about them all. We'd be here all night. But Squawk Mountain, Tiger Mountain, Cougar Mountain, Grand Ridge, these all have had initiatives and battles fought for the conservation of public land and trail building and all. It's the results are well, they're so profound that Issaquah likes to call itself Trailhead City, and rightly so. We do have just a wealth of trails available to us right here from Issaquah, and it's not something to be taken for granted. It didn't have to come out. It didn't have to end this way. If you've been to the park, Sky Country Park on top of Cougar Mountain, I mean, we're not talking about hillsides so steep that you can't build on. We're talking about prime land that could have easily been developed at a great profit, but it didn't happen that way. And we all enjoy the results of that. Lastly, one of the outcroppings of the club's effort was the Mountains of Sound Greenway. A trek across the Issaquah Alps occurred in 1988 and another one in 1989. That was actually my first hike with the club, was the 1989 Grand Traverse across Cougar Mountain, Squawk Mountain, and Tiger Mountain. And the guy who ran that, Jack Horning, his vision was bigger than that. That was a pretty big vision of itself, but his vision was bigger than that. That this little Grand Traverse, it should go all the way to Snoqualmie Pass and beyond. And so the vision for the Mountains of Sound Greenway was born within the club by Jack Horning, and it blossomed from there. And it's quite now a force in the region for conservation and for good. Okay, next slide, please. So Issaquah Alps Trails Club today, we have about 350 members, free guided hikes every weekend. Well, we used to do that anyway, but then this COVID-19 thing happened, and so that's all suspended. Our trail maintenance projects have also been suspended. Advocacy has not been suspended. It's easy to think that, well, maybe the story is all told. All the land that there is to develop has been developed, and there's no more battles to be fought. But we have several advocacy efforts going on right now. Our work is never done. We have a monthly newsletter, The Alpiner. We have a website and Facebook and the usual social media things. So if you're interested in more about this, I invite you to go check it out at those places and join the fun. That's all I've got.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. So I have a brief Harvey Manning story to share. So not only did he name the Issaquah Alps, but he named Poo Poo Point, which is the rocky outcropping up on Tiger Mountain. And of course, Poo Poo Point, why? Is it scatological? Are we naming them after Hawaiian appetizer platters? What's going on here? So he named the mountain for the sound of the steam whistle on the steam donkeys that were all over Tiger Mountain at one point, that were there for logging. And of course, the sound that a steam whistle makes is poo poo. So that's why we have Poo Poo Point. And now we're going to zoom out from the local organizations that formed in Issaquah, and we're going to look at some of the links to national events that occurred in Issaquah during the 1970s. So we're going to hand it over to Brandon to do that.
Thank you, Erica. And actually, before I get started, I just want to say I so appreciate the work of the Issaquah Alps Trail Club. As someone who moved here in 2012 and has kids who are 14 and have grown up in Issaquah, just none of us can imagine a world without those Issaquah Alps. And I just want to say that is excellent marketing, because those are not blobs. They're clearly Alps. So, thank you. All right, so you see here, our first picture is a plane with the Seattle Skyport Club, and you see people skydiving out of there, and you see Lake Sammamish in the area below. And there's, some of you will probably know, but it was news to me when I first got here. The Issaquah Skyport was where Costco is now, and Lynn Emmerich was the manager of this club. And I've had friends who grew up in the area, and they've told me this is what they thought of. This is the kind of thing they thought of when they were growing up. When they thought of Issaquah, this was the country. This was the place where you went to see a farm or go do outdoor activities. It was also the site of, oh, actually, go ahead to the next slide, please. It was the site of the 1963 National Parachute Championship. So that's a pretty big deal. That's national news itself. But there's another national story that we're going to connect to. And let's just go ahead and go on to this picture. Yes, no, go ahead. That's right. November 1971. So I was 4 years old. I was 4 months old at the time. So I just want to make clear at the outset, I am not B.B. Cooper. I had nothing to do. I want to say that because we've actually, it's one of the great mysteries in American history. To my knowledge, nobody knows who this man was. The FBI never caught him. They kept the case open for decades. This is one of the great stories. And for those of you who are into Mad Men, There was a lot of, you may remember, there was a lot of speculation how Mad Men would end. And my favorite theory, I think it's really the leading theory among fans, was he would turn out to be D.B. Cooper. That's not the way it ended, but that was the guess. So November 1971, there was a Boeing flight from Portland to Seattle, and a man who called himself D.B. Cooper stopped the flight attendant and handed her a note. One of my favorite wrinkles in this weird story is that she thought he was hitting on him, so she just put it in the bag and tried to ignore it. And he grabbed her and said, no, you need to read this note. And it's he had a bomb and he would use it. He was hijacking the plane. So when they landed, they stopped in Seattle, and he had demanded $200,000 in $20 bills. So I looked this up. That's equivalent to roughly $1.2 million today. There are all kinds of problems with this plan. I'm not saying it would have helped to ask for more money, but I think he undersold this whole plan. $1.2 million does not seem like enough for this. He requested 4 civilian parachutes. Now, there were two, my understanding is there were 2 types of parachutes at this time. There was one for professionals, people who really knew what they were doing, one for civilians who, were just learning. He was definitely a civilian. He did not know what he was doing. So where could they get that? The FBI figured out quickly, Issaquah Skyport. So that is Issaquah's connection to the story. Officer Ed Mott, who we'll hear more about later, and a Washington State trooper made the 30-minute trip in 15 minutes. And that's where Issaquah's part ends, but I'll continue with the story. If I remember correctly, it was supposed to be a flight to Reno. It was a very strange situation. He told them to take off, small crew, just him in the back, and they weren't really sure when he left. At some point, they realized he wasn't there anymore. He had jumped out from 10,000 feet, they suspect, over Southwest Washington. As I said, the body was never found. Some of the money was found. And again, the FBI didn't close that case until I think maybe about 12 years ago. And I'm sure there've got to be FBI agents out there who still want to catch him. But I suspect it did not end well for Mr. Cooper. All right. Next slide, please. So I want to say before we start this, we've actually had some discussion in the History Museum about whether to tell this story. And I want to say it is a somewhat difficult story. Most of you will probably know it. And we're going to try to be as respectful as possible to the victims by focusing on them a little bit and on the perpetrator a little bit less. But this is the story of Ted Bundy. You'll recognize here Lake Sammamish State Park in 1974. It's interesting to see that landscape now. It's changed so much in recent years. There was a Rainier Beer employee event, and roughly 40,000 people were in the park. Let's go on to the next slide, please. And here are the 2 women that we're talking about today. On the left, you see Janice Ott. She was a probation officer, and she was renting a house in downtown Issaquah. She left a note that day on the door for her friends saying she had gone to the lake to get some sun. On the right, we have Denise Naslund, who lived in Seattle, and she worked in an office to support her taking evening computer classes. And she had gone to the lake with her boyfriend and another couple. And both men reported both women, we later figured out, encountered a man asking for help loading a boat onto his car. Sorry, I got some feedback there. Thank you. This is apparently one of his main ruses. In fact, I think if I remember correctly, one of the ways that Mr. Bundy was caught was he asked a woman to help with a boat on his car. And when she realized he didn't have a boat, she ran away and turned him in. But he was not caught this time. Neither of these women was ever seen again. And Issaquah residents remembered years later hearing the helicopters that searched that night for them. Next slide, please. Here's Chuck's mobile station. So that is at Front and Sunset. Erica, please check me on this. Is this where the library is now? I forgot to ask that. Erica, you may be on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was playing with the mute button there. So I believe that this was where the library is and that it was kitty corner to the other gas station that's in existence today. But there are folks in the chat room here who may know better than me. So somebody wave and correct me if I'm wrong.
Dave McIntosh confirms.
Okay, excellent.
And he also says that he was there on that day.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Several people have come in. I encourage people to look in the chat because I think there's some local knowledge here. Thank you, everybody. So Bundy stopped here for gas, and his receipt actually helped convict him later. Let's go on to the next slide. So September 6th of that year, 1974, a grouse hunter came into the police station and talked to the police officer, Ed Mott, who, again, has appeared in 2 of these stories now. He's had quite a career, obviously. The grouse hunter thought he had found some human remains. Officer Mott went with him and confirmed this. It was the remains of Naslund Ott and another unidentified young woman. This is about a mile from the park on a service road near I-90. And it's, I'm sorry, Erica, would you mind confirming this? You actually had a suggestion of where this was when we were talking earlier. You muted yourself again. Unmute.
I'll get that figured out before the end of the evening. Yeah, so it was a service road that kind of ran parallel to I-90, and it's near what is today the rail right-of-way that runs all the way to Preston and High Point.
Thank you. And it turns out this was just outside of the city limits, which means that the city of Issaquah did not have to conduct this investigation, which I take it, just given the size of the department, they would have been ill-equipped to do. So the county, I take it, took care of this. Next slide, please. Here's Mr. Bundy. He was arrested and tried for murder and kidnapping. In 1977, he escaped from prison and made his way to Florida, where he was arrested again. He confessed to the Lake Sammamish murders, 2 out of more than 30 that he committed. He was executed in 1989, and I will just make a personal comment. I am not in favor of the death penalty, but I do understand in some cases, and this is one of them. And then the third of my 3 stories is this one that begins here. This is part of the High-Low Shopping Center. It was west of Gilman Village, and this is the site where there was the Waterhole Tavern, and my understanding is, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe this is where the Kentucky Fried Chicken is today, or roughly there. Yes, and Dave Brumpton was the owner, and he decided apparently the tavern was not doing the kind of business that he wanted. Dave, thank you so much. You're helping a lot. It was not the kind of business he wanted. He decided he was going to reopen this as a topless bar. Now, if you remember that, the population chart that Eric put up early on, in 1980, Issaquah would have had a little bit more of the population of the small town I grew up in, rural Kentucky. And I'm trying to imagine if someone had tried to open a topless bar in 1980 in my hometown, how that would have gone over. I assumed that the town was not excited about this, and the sign that said, "Girls, girls, girls," live on stage. I think marketing for topless clubs just doesn't have to be interesting. Everybody knows what they're getting into, I suppose. Wednesday was going to be an amateur night, and Sunday was going to have male dancers, so there's something for everybody. This next part of the story, by the way, I got some sort of confirmation on a pub crawl one day. Yes, go ahead, please, Erica. Yes. I got some confirmation one time on a pub crawl because as I told this next part of the story and talked about the Seattle mob, the guy said, "Was it this family?" And I said, "I believe it is that name." He said, "Oh yeah, I know a member of that family. That's true. This is rumor, so that's not history, but it was fun." So you don't think of Seattle having a mob, but of course, a city of any size has organized crime. Apparently, somebody decided they controlled this line of business in the area. And so approached Mr. Brumpton and said, "You're going to use our girls and sell our cigarettes." And he refused. And a couple nights later, you see that the tavern blew up. I actually want to commend the Issaquah press. There were some obvious puns they could have made on topless. They resisted. And they just noted that the building had blown sky high. The explosion was heard throughout the area. I cannot imagine what that was like. Damages were roughly $250,000, approximately what D.B. Cooper had requested, just as a coincidence. And then go to the next slide, please, our last slide. This is kind of the saddest part of this to me. The owner had to be cleared of torching the water hole. He apparently was so far in debt that he was an obvious suspect because they suspected he had blown it up to commit arson. And the notes say that the judge determined that he was not the kind of man who would be bothered by having debt, and so he was not guilty, which I think is a great excuse. This case was never solved. So that concludes our national stories. I hand it back to Erica. And mute.
I'm muted again. So I'm going to do a quick conclusion, and then we're going to open it up to questions and experiences. And I know that we at least have a couple people here who remember hearing the sound of the waterhole explosion. So we'd love to have you chime in just a minute. So upcoming happy hours. These are our 3 next dates. We're going to take August off. You will, if you're not already, you will have been put on our mailing list after tonight, and you'll get an email letting you know when all of these are happening and that you can sign up for tickets. So we hope that you will join us again on one of these events. Our website is also a great place to go to find more information and to keep track of what we're doing. Of particular interest are the events tab, which shows you what events we're having, all virtual right now, although we may have some live outdoor events in October. and this other tab shows you the Join Us section where you can go and become a member. And that will get you 10% off gift shop items, free admission to the museums, and discounts on fabulous activities like this. So let's go ahead and open it up to questions and contributions. Does anybody, you want to wave a hand, or you can make a mention in the chat? I don't want to put any, Mary.
If I remember correctly, the name of the mob family that was, and I just hope they don't come looking for me, that was involved in the explosion was the Colacurcio brothers, and they already owned a very prominent topless joint in Factoria of their own. That place no longer exists either. It's, of course, turned into part of the mall there, but it had a huge sign, a gigantic pre-I-90 sign that stuck up, that revolved, that talked about it, their topless girls there. And Factoria at that point was not a part of Bellevue. It was still unincorporated King County, I suppose. Anyway, so they had this huge sign, and they didn't want to relinquish any topless customers to anybody else on the east side, in particular, certainly not Issaquah. So they were the ones that were objecting to his not selling their cigarettes and having their girls.
That is fascinating. I did not know that there was another such bar in Factoria. That makes a lot of sense that
And it
they would
lasted
not.
for several more years until finally, I think the real estate got to be worth more than the topless business.
Right.
And they bulldozed it and made that area part of the mall there.
Mary,
Right.
I love the hint of Issaquah pride in your story.
Well. And nothing's ever yet been built on that site. It's just a flat piece of, last time I checked, it was still a flat piece of concrete.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about it. Anybody else want to share any memories from the 70s? I know we had somebody who was talking about signing up, and they were hoping to share some information about caroling. So, and we've got Ken Konigsmark has raised his hand. So I just unmuted you, Ken. Go for it.
Okay, first, thanks to Tom for a really good summary of the history of Issaquah Alps and how it came to be. Full disclosure, I'm on the board with Tom, and I'm actually the longest serving board member in the history of the club, like 33 years on the board.
Wow.
So it dates me. But anyway, the point is that I'd like to make, I don't think there's any entity that has shaped this community more than this little club of ragtag volunteers to turn Issaquah into what it is today. If this club had not done what it had done there were virtually 0 acres of public land when this all started. Now there are over 30,000 acres surrounding Issaquah. So step by step, piece by piece, and not always with willing partners, this club has fought and gotten a lot of this done that has kept Issaquah green, and the whole vibe of Issaquah being environmentally friendly, very green. That's a result of all of these efforts. So I think it's worth noting that this little club, with no paid staff, nobody at that time, shaped Issaquah more than even its own government did, in my opinion.
Erica, we have a question. When was the Slide Water Park, and is that where Costco is now?
So the
There's an answer
Slide,
there.
the Slide Water Park was where, roughly where exit 15 is, kind of over by the Holiday Inn. And that was in the early, so I think it went away in the early 1980s. I think it had some serious liability issues. And of course, the weather in this part of the world is not the greatest for water slides for, something like 9 months out of the year. So, yeah, so that's where that was. Any other questions, contributions? I know there's some other folks here from the 70s. Yes.
Can you hear me, Erica?
Yes, I can.
Oh, this is Doug.
Hey, Doug, how's it going?
Going all right. One of the first hikes that the Issaquah Alps Trails Club did, I was on. Harvey was there also.
Oh, wow.
Jackie and I, of course, were much younger then. We were hiking to the waterfall that's on the other side of I-90 from Snoqualmie Falls. It's a beautiful thing, but it's a trail that goes up and down and around and up and down again and around up. And there was a bunch of young people, including Jackie and me, and this old geezer who turned out to be Harvey Manning. And I thought, good grief, he's gonna, everybody was thinking he's gonna slow us down. It's gonna take much longer than if it was just a bunch of young people. Well, the hike started, he took off. We never saw him again until we got to the falls. He was using a cane, and he out-hiked all of us. So that's my story about Harvey.
Just goes to show, you never do know.
You never do know. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Jean.
I wanted to go back to the environmental history here in Issaquah. In the mid-1970s, the Issaquah Residence for Environmental Quality, known as IREC, formed. And the reason it formed was the Ben Franklin store came to town, and the first thing they did was run up a huge high pole with a Ben Franklin sign on top, right there on Front Street. And a few people took umbrage at that because they felt it just didn't fit the character of the town. And then McDonald's appeared on what used to be Highway 10, and they ran a big sign up. So IREC formed, and I remember spending a Saturday out with the husbands and everybody else doing triangulations to estimate the height of these poles. And out of all of that came the Issaquah sign ordinance, which I'm sure some businesses absolutely hate, but most of us like because the signs are in proportion to the building. And our neighbor, Betty Hancock, is the one who really did the research on that. She was part of IREC, and she checked on lots of other towns in the Northwest. And I think the original sign ordinance is closely aligned with Bellevue's. And she met with the city people, and eventually the sign ordinance formed. So then the group kind of dissolved and didn't go on like the Alps, but that was early on. And the picture that you showed of the brats and brochen, that was an IREC booth in 1974. So anyway, a little back history on interest in the environment.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that, Jean. I thought that was an IREC stand, but I forgot to mention that when we went through it. But yeah, that was another one of the organizations that people got really fired up at Issaquah in the 1970s and early 80s because things were changing so much. So the other big legal battle that happened in the 80s was over the skyport, and the owners wanted to develop it, and everybody in the community wanted a skyport, and so they put it to a vote. And there were two different parts of the ballot. One was, do you want a skyport in Issaquah? And they were going to create a new skyport over by Lake Sammamish Park. And then the other part of it was, do you want to pay a tax to pay for the skyport? And everybody wanted the skyport, but nobody wanted the tax. And so that was the end of the skyport. Although I've heard other people comment that the skyport probably was not long for the world, given the proximity of I-90. So it was kind of a dangerous place to have planes taking off and landing and having people skydiving, because you don't want to end up landing in the middle of I-90 when you're skydiving. So, so we came up a little short on, let's see, we got one more comment.
Yeah, David was interested in maybe sharing a story with us.
Yeah, that sounds great. Did you want to share your story out loud, David, or did you just want to share it in chat?
So have I unmuted myself?
You have. Thank you.
Well, I have 1,000 stories. My family and I moved to Issaquah in '68 when I was 10 years old, and I went through the Issaquah school system. 6th grade for me was the first year, Issaquah Valley Elementary. sorry, yes, Issaquah Valley Elementary opened. I think that was 70. And, you know, I went to Issaquah High School, Issaquah Junior High. In high school, my friends and I, a few of us, kept in shape for football in the fall by working for the Pickerings. And we would throw hay bales onto a big flatbed truck and then rumble back to the barn. And, you know, up the escalator, the bales of hay would go, and we'd stack the barn. And it was, you know, hot, sweaty, sticky work, but we enjoyed it. My classmate was Darren Pickering. And so Rob Pickering and a couple of the other Pickerings were, you know, all part of that summer. Issaquah Salmon Days, you know, I grew up with that. Apparently they scheduled that typically right around my early October birthday. So I always appreciated that. I was at Lake Sammamish State Park, you know, the same day Ted Bundy was. I remember the Rainier Beer Blast, as they called it. And my friend and I, a few weeks later, actually thought that we found Ted Bundy and his Volkswagen Bug in a garage. We were wrong, but at the time we were playing detective and thought we had caught up with him. But yeah, again, just a great place to grow up. Again, a family of 5 kids. When we moved in, like I said, 68 to Issaquah, the house that we moved into, new construction on Squawk Mountain, and at the time it was the highest elevation for any home that had been built in Issaquah up to that point in time. And yeah, just a great place to grow up. I live with my family in Duval now, so we're still, you know, sort of in the valley. And I get back to Issaquah every now and then. That's where my dad is buried. Yeah, just great memories. Homecoming King and some other fun things. I tell people I peaked in high school. So, yeah, this has been fun. I'm going to look at some of the photos that seem to be available as well.
Awesome.
And really enjoyed it. I knew I would.
Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate that, David. Ken has his hand up again. David, or Ken, go for it.
Okay. There was another thing I've heard about that happened in the 70s. I wonder if anybody knows about this. It's on the land that was owned by Julia Gunn Kissel, which is now along Newport Way, where the Big Tree Ridge Trail is. And we acquired that land probably in about 1998 or 2000, somewhere in there. But the story was that back in the 70s, the Weathermen, a radical group, had planted explosives for bomb making on that land, and it was discovered, and no bombs ever occurred. But does anybody know if that was a true story?
I have not heard that one before, but I'm going to go looking for it in the Issaquah Press now. Anybody else? Does that ring any bells for anybody else? I'll check into that, and if I find anything, I'll include it in our follow-up email, because that's not a rumor I'd heard before, or a story I'd heard before. Any other questions or things to share? We've got a great group of people here tonight. I see lots of names and a few faces. So if you don't have anything else to share or ask, we can wrap up for the night. But I really appreciate everybody joining in. Hope to see you at future happy hours, and we are always taking ideas. So if you have a particular idea of something that you think it would be fun to focus on for a part or all of a history happy hour, let us know. We would love suggestions. All right. Thank you guys all for coming.